everybody, I'm Jen,
And I'm Tammy.
and they call us Woo.
Hi, and welcome back, everybody. Today, we are going to talk about pyramids. Specifically, we're talking about some interesting spiritual, metaphysical, cosmic history in
Hmm.
pyramids. And there's one in particular that Jen was going to talk about a little bit that I decided not to say the name of right now because I can't say it really well. But we thought it would be fun to talk about that, and that's not something that I get to talk about that much. But there is quite a rich history of spiritual connection,
Hmm.
and I would love for you to talk a little bit more about why we wanted to talk about this in the first place.
Of course. So it was my fiance and I were watching a show that was talking about a very controversial site that's a historic site that they think could potentially be over 16,000 years old, like an ancient pyramid. And if the findings by the one team are true, that means it is the oldest pyramid or oldest site that they think a pyramid was on. Um, and there's a lot of historians that are kind of ticked off about it, frankly. It's a site that's called Gunung Padang, and it's in Java, Indonesia. And it's this really cool site that's like kind of layered dirt. And then there's basalt stones that are laying all over on this site. And there's the sides of it are all lined with this basalt stone. And then there's structures where these stones have fallen over and they've kind of recreated and they've mapped out with my brain wants to say infrared technology. That's not right. Like they scan inside the earth to see what's there, and they're
Mm-hmm.
finding that there are three sections underneath the earth that are large cavernous areas that they think are actually chambers, just like they find in other pyramids around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And these basalt stones, they started looking at them and they don't originate from that area. They would have had to have been carried in over 150 miles and brought to this space. And the craziest part of it is how heavy these stones are. It's kind of like the pyramids in Egypt, where people are like, how the heck would
Yeah.
anybody carry these things?
Mm-hmm.
These basalt stones are, I have a piece of paper in front of me and I wrote it down. They're over a half a ton in weight each, that they would have had to climb up a mountain carrying these stones to put all of these basalt stones on this specific site. And so it's like up 350 feet up this mountainside.
Mm-hmm.
And then, well, the site itself is up 350 feet. So they would have had to carry a half-ton stone. And there's, I thought I wrote it down, but I guess I didn't write it down. But there's so many stones. There was like 16,000 stones or something.
Wow.
That number is inaccurate. Nobody call me out on that. I know that number is inaccurate, but it was a whole lot of stones. I want to say it was actually like it was more than that. Um, but they would have had to carry all of those up this mountainside,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no way you could do that 16,000 years ago. And so I thought it was really interesting. Historians are kind of at odds on this site because if this site is actually 16,000 years old, that means that it's saying that people had the technologies to do these things in an area that would have been a hunter-gatherer area, in an area that they don't think people would have the technologies to do that way back further than the ancient Egypt pyramids. And so historians are like, that makes us change everything, and we don't
You're
want to do
messing it
that.
all up.
Yes. And so it was just one more spiritual site that there's there's controversy over, which there's a lot of those sites. If you actually start digging into it, there's a lot of sites that they're like, oh, that's way older than we thought it was. Um, so I thought we could talk a little bit about that because I've always wanted to go inside a pyramid, and I've always wanted to see these historical sites. So it was just an interesting topic to kind of dive into with you.
Yeah.
So, one, have you ever been interested in pyramids in general?
You know, I mean, I can't say there's certain things in this world that I definitely am like, I have to see that at some point.
Mhm.
And of course, because they're amazing, yes, I would want to see them for that, but it's never been like I absolutely have to see that. That's the first thing that needs to be on my list. However, I do know someone who is going to Egypt um, sometime soon who is going to do a hot air balloon ride over some, like around some of the pyramids, which sounds amazing to be able to see them from there. But anyway, I did see some ruins in Mexico, which I thought were pretty cool.
Hmm.
But yeah, I guess I'm kind of fascinated with some of the conversation we were having because certainly there's a lot of people who feel like there's connection to aliens
Yes.
with the pyramids, and a lot of people who are very confused about how that was possible. And there's people who don't believe in aliens were like, oh, there's, have come up with ways that that could have happened. But let's be honest, it does seem like a bit of a stretch to assume in a time before like the big equipment that we have now
Hmm.
that that would be something that people could do very easily. And if they could do it, why haven't we found any of the tools that they used to do it, to move the stones?
Yeah.
Because we
Yeah.
find like in some of the places where there was a lot of, innovation, like ancient Greece, they had like plumbing systems and stuff like that. You can
Mhm.
find evidence of all that stuff. You can find evidence of the
Yeah.
things that people have used over time that were very innovative things for their time. And those stand out because people are like, oh, look, they were so advanced. But how did these things happen? And then there's like zero evidence of the tools they used to do it.
Yeah. Well, and so you brought up modern day equipment, and frankly, I think it would be hard to get some of those stones up there and all of those stones up there with modern day equipment as well. Because, like, we'll put a link to like images of this place in particular, the Gunung Padang. Um, but to get something up there, like the angles of the hills, if you were using some of the modern day equipment, I'm pretty sure the equipment would fall over carrying as many of those stones as they had. And like the way that they're laid out and the way that they're structured, I don't even know if modern day equipment could do that without one, a lot of fatalities, and two, without like moving the earth to a point where you would see where their paths
Mm-hmm.
were to move the earth there. Like
Yeah, it could be.
it's these
I
sites are
need
just
to
really interesting.
look into that more, I think, because it is interesting too that you find structures, like unexplained structures, but structures like pyramids and stuff in a lot of different places
Hmm.
around the world too, which then kind of makes you wonder too, like why,
Yeah.
what reason would people have for creating these very similar structures in different areas of the world?
Yeah. Well, and then you look at like how they're laid out, and a lot of the pyramids that are around the world are actually laid out and align with very specific star systems or very specific stars. So like the pyramids in Egypt and the pyramids in Giza are lined up with Orion. And some of the other pyramids around the world are also lined up the same way. So they're when they hit a certain time of the day, you can see their alignment to different star systems and
Mm-hmm.
different specific stars. Um, and I don't think that, like, there had to have been some type of ancient communication happening, whether it was like people were telepathically communicate. I don't know how they
Mm-hmm.
knew, but like to have so many different places that things were lined up the same way and things were built the same way, and there were a lot of different stories. Like, this was the other thing that I was looking at, is the stories that are like the hieroglyphs and the petroglyphs and things that are on the walls in those specific sites. A lot of those sites all tell these same stories about different beings, or
Mm-hmm.
people who are really large, or like just the stories that are there. There's something else to it because there's
Mm-hmm.
so many different people that have drawn on the walls these stories of giants. And it's like, okay, so if we had giants on this earth, it would be really easy for them to carry around a half-ton block from one place to another and stack those.
Mm-hmm.
It would also be much easier for, I would say, aliens to do those things, like to
Yeah, if they were
transport
more
them. Like,
advanced, certainly
yeah.
there's technologies that could have been available.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so you have mentioned before that you are really kind of drawn to some of the pyramids. Do you want to explain that a little bit, or what kind of draws you to them?
So, since I was younger, I've had like past life visions of like different ceremonies and different things in temples in Egypt. And I feel very, very called to that. I also had, when I was, how old was I? I went in to get a pedicure and a massage at a random place that I had never been before. And I sat down in the massage chair, and or in the pedicure chair, and their massage therapist there just randomly walked past me, and she's like, "Oh." And I was like, "What?" Like, I didn't know why she was looking at me so funny.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "Oh, you had some lifetimes in Egypt." And she started, like, she said a few things, and then she just bopped along, like just walked away. And I'm like, what? And I knew nothing. I knew nothing about past lives. Like, I had been having like visions of things since I was young, but I didn't really know anything. And
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, oh, that was a cool dream. Oh, that was a cool, weird thing that just happened to me where I didn't feel like I was in my body in this space and I was somewhere else. Like, I didn't know. And so after that, I wasn't supposed to be getting a massage that day. And I went to the front desk and I was like, is the massage therapist open today? Like, can I get a massage? And she just happened to have time. And so I went in and got a massage from her, and she started talking to me about past lives. And there were some really beautiful messages that came in, but it really piqued my interest a little bit
Mm-hmm.
because I was like, I've been having these images in my head since I was a kid. And for her to just be like, oh, you had these lifetimes in Egypt, I was like, that's an interesting thing.
It's
Um,
funny when you hear. I was just in a conversation today about like Akashic records and just different things that even if you don't know what it is you're saying, like you can always tell when there's a seed of truth to it,
mhm,
and like something just like pings where you're like, okay. I don't know what this is,
mhm.
but okay. And to be fair,
Yep.
sometimes it scares the crap out of you and you're like, nope. But other times you're just, that's the right time for you to be like, okay, now I'm curious. What is this?
Yeah. Sorry, I keep getting a tickle in my throat. Um, so it was interesting at that point because I wasn't really um I was young and wasn't really traveling, and I didn't really know anything about the pyramids or Egyptian traditions or cultures or anything like that. Like I didn't logically know anything. I had a very deep sense of certain things. And so as I've gotten older, it's just become more and more of a draw for me because I want to go and see the pyramids. Like I want to go in the pyramids because I feel like I'm going to walk in the pyramids and I'm going to go, "Oh, this place. I know this." Like it just feels like something. And it's interesting because when I moved down in with my fiance, he every once in a while he'll buy things off of like this auction site thing. And for whatever reason, he bought some Egyptian artwork. He was really called to it and he got this Egyptian artwork. So we have some Egyptian artwork in our house. And every time I look at it in the morning, I'm like, why is that in my house now? Like, there is something about this. And it's too, like, the picture that's in our bathroom is too, like, I don't know if they're an Egyptian king and a queen, but they, of course, have, like, I think one of them has a dog head and one of them has, like, a different, like, headdress. Like, they're not necessarily people, or maybe they just have, I can't remember. Maybe they just have different head gear, headwear, whatever the word is for that. Um,
I don't know.
but they're not,
I have no idea. Now that you say that, I'm like, I don't know what you call that either.
yeah, I'm gonna call it headgear, even though I think that that's
It
something to
reminds
do
me
with
of
your
like
teeth.
old school,
Yes,
like what was that braces thing where people had to wear the
yes,
whole thing on their
yes.
head?
That is not what it is. It's like, it's like stuff you wear on your head. I keep wanting to say headdress, but it's like maybe it's
Isn't
an
that what it is
Egyptian
though?
headdress.
Headdress. That sounds right.
That's a Native American headdress, but I don't know if
I
it's the
think that
same
you
in
can use that to
Egypt.
like talk about any like form of accoutrements on someone's head
Okay.
and throw out that word.
Well,
So you could use that too. You could say
so
accoutrements.
I'm just gonna say it's headgear because it's goofy and that's what's coming out of my mouth. But so this image, we've looked up to see if we could figure out who these people are in this specific picture, and we really can't figure it out. So it's not like a traditional, like usually people would be like, "Oh, this is the queen, whatever. This is this specific Egyptian god. This is this." We haven't necessarily been able to figure it out. We've had a few guesses, and then we're like, "Well, the headgear isn't exactly right." Like the symbols aren't exactly right. So it's just really interesting to me that we have these images that are not necessarily somebody who is a traditional Egyptian god that would be in a painting or in, I don't know what it is that both of us were very called to this specific piece, but I'm like, who is that? What is that? And so now I want to go to Egypt and I want to learn because I want to figure out who these people are in this picture in
Now
our
you have a
bathroom.
mission.
Yes, now I have a mission. But
So you've said too that you in some of these like dreams and stuff that you've had that there was actually like ceremony and stuff that was happening too,
mhm,
right? So
yep.
ceremony is or has been a big part of the pyramids. Have
Mhm.
you gotten any like when you started to connect with that, have you gotten any downloads, any information of maybe some of the significance that it would have any correlation with some with you know aliens or with humanity's spiritual ceremonies? Like, have you gotten any information on that out of curiosity?
So the few like really, really graphic images that I've gotten and the times where I felt like I stepped out of my body and were like was actually in those spaces, it felt more like there was energy being amplified through the pyramids, and that the structure was like amplification of your connection and communication with the divine.
Okay.
Whether or not that is because there are like alien technologies was not something that was super apparent in any of my visions,
Okay.
and in any of my experiences, but it was definitely not a typical human um amplification experience. So it was like
Okay.
the energy that was around me in those spaces and the energy that was happening during those ceremonies was very not human worldly. It was like otherworldly, but I can't say like otherworldly like alien or otherworldly like divine,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't I don't know. I don't know. Like that's a really good question, Tammy. I'm like I can recognize what some of the ceremonies were, but I don't know, like there was really no indication of where the energy was coming from or how the energy was being amplified.
Well, now that makes me kind of curious too, because I feel like while there's a lot of questions, not a lot of people have had clarity on the answers for that.
Hmm.
Um, which then makes me wonder if it's something that we're going to continue to get more clarity on, because it's very clear that right now this is an age of evolution and enlightenment and ascension for humans. So there's a lot of information that's maybe like we're more ready for or whatever, so we're getting, so it kind of makes me wonder, like, is this something that is just not that important and we're just obsessed with it? Is it like these aliens that were like, we were just trying to help you out, like we don't need credit for it? Or
Hmm.
was it like information
Yeah.
that will become clearer as people start to get more information about that and share it with the rest of the world? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not saying that there might not be information out there somewhere that somebody knows, but
Yeah.
I feel
I
like
don't
there's a
I
lot of
don't
confusion around it still.
I agree with that, and I think that until people, this is my personal opinion, until people learn to be more respectful of the things that are in the pyramids and around the pyramids,
Oh, like the
I don't
sacred
know
site.
that we're gonna, yeah, I don't know that we're gonna get answers, because I think there's a whole lot of shielding and protection around those spaces at this point.
Mm.
Um, I I've seen some documentaries and I've seen some things about the way that they go in and they start looking at the sacred sites and they dig everything up. They dig everything up and then they're like, oh, we have to carbon date this and we have to do this and we have to do that. And while I think that's important, I also think that it's important for us to recognize that a lot of these sites are sacred sites.
Yeah. You can
They've,
still respect the site and the land, and digging things up and carbon dating them, while that might be a respected form of figuring out information in our world, it's not the only way to do it. There's other ways to
no.
get information on it.
And it's like, I have a hard time sometimes, and I think this is part of my hesitation with going to the pyramids and things, is because I feel like, okay, some of those places were tombs. So it's the burial grounds for the dead. And people are just going and they're like, I'm gonna be a tourist and I'm gonna like look at this burial site and like taking pictures and like doing all these things. And so sometimes I'm like, I don't know that I want to go and be like a tourist to a sacred cemetery, you know?
Yeah,
It's
that does make sense. I don't know. I think, done respectfully, I don't know if we could stop that though, because
no.
even when you think of like, I, I enjoy actually walking through cemeteries sometimes,
Yeah.
because there's something that is intriguing, but also there's something that can be very like peaceful, or sometimes it's very interesting to see, um, like especially some of the really old places
Yeah.
where people were laid. But I think you're right that I mean, we always have a fascination with that, right? Like
Hmm.
we just do, and a fascination with our own mortality or what we perceive to be the
Yeah.
end of our life. Um, but I think there's a way to do it respectfully. And from what I understand right now, people really aren't allowed to do a lot of like actually like touching or going into the pyramids because they're trying to preserve them.
Hmm.
Um, I believe it's from the perspective, of course, it's a sacred site, but also like it's a wonder of the world. So they're trying to keep them from being too, just from being toured so much that it starts to wear down.
Yeah. I well, and I think that there's something to be said for people going in and paying respects and being respectful of spaces and even going outside the pyramids and um any pyramid, whether it's the Egyptian pyramids or any other pyramid that's around the world, going to those sites and being respectful and creating your own ceremony around being in that space because those sacred sites do hold very powerful energy. And like every documentary that I've heard and every documentary that I've seen, there's always at least one scientist in there that's like, it just felt very different. Like you can tell there's always one that's like, the science of this is really cool, but it feels really different here.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like you can see that there's power in those places, and they're meant to be places where you can hold sacred ceremony and you can connect with the divine and you can connect with your own spiritual presence. And I think what ends up happening is when we start touring those places, people will just go because it's a place to go to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, this really cool place. And people lose that respect and that connection. And if we can maintain the connection and set guidelines around, hey, just be aware that this is a sacred space and just be
Mm-hmm.
aware that this is what it's for, I think that that would be helpful.
Yeah,
Um,
it reminds me a
but
lot like being from the area that we're from. We have a lot of mounds, Native American
mhm,
burial sites, and there in our particular area there's a lot, and there is something about keeping the holding space for that, keeping it as
mhm,
something that feels sacred and special, even if you are not a person who understands it or is connected in any way to that history,
yeah, yeah,
because those spaces will protect themselves or
mhm,
have energies around them that protect them because sometimes it is a really powerful source of energy, and that is something that was intentional and
mhm,
could be really beneficial for people. But if they are disrespectful of it,
mhm,
it's not only just being disrespectful to land or to the memory, it's being disrespectful to the energy. And at the
mhm,
very least, you're just keeping yourself and everyone else from being able to enjoy whatever the purpose of that energetic space was. At
yeah,
at the least, you know, more than that, it could be where it starts to get very protective, and you're like, wow, okay,
yeah,
backing up.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, it's really important. It's kind of even just going into what everybody knows of. It's important to know the history,
mhm,
and the more we can share that with people, the more respectful I think people can be. But I can totally understand why people are fascinated and want to go. Like, you can still do it in a respectful way, right? But
yeah,
I'm just really curious because I'm gonna be honest, right now there's something that's trying to like channel out of me, and I'm like, I don't know if that has anything to do with what we're talking about. But it does make you kind of wonder like what interesting connections it has to like humanity in general, because some of the pyramids, like we said, they're everywhere, but some of them are really big too.
Yep.
And they as far as I understand, they weren't always just for the sake of tombs, were they, or
Nope,
were they
nope. A
all?
lot of them were ceremonial.
Okay,
So
that's what
there's
I
like
thought.
chambers for ceremony, and then there's some that are tombs.
Okay.
And so, like the ones that are for ceremony, a lot of the time they'll let people go into them for tours and things like that. And there are some people who actually schedule tours there and they'll hold ceremonies in those spaces. I keep forgetting some of my words. Like I stop halfway through a word. I don't know what's going on. You brought up Mercury retrograde earlier, and I'm like, well, I don't know. Just words are just not working for me all the time. But
Words, internet, it's all down
yeah,
today.
it's all funky. But but so some people still will go and hold ceremonies in those spaces because they can rent those spaces to be used,
Mm,
which again is kind of an odd thing, but at the same time, if they're doing it for ceremonial purposes and they're
yeah.
utilizing that
If
space
it's
as it
done
was intended,
respectfully, and
yeah.
it could, I mean, the money could just be an exchange of energy as long as it's being
Mhm.
done respectfully. It might not be a bad thing, and that people aren't just doing strange things in there.
Mhm. I don't know what people do all the time, but yeah, but so there's some that were like that they know were specifically for ceremonial spaces and some that were for tombs. But then there's other like the Gunung Padang, they have no idea. They have absolutely no idea what that was actually used for. For a long time, they didn't even think that that was a sacred space. They just thought it was just something that was built there. And for a
Oh.
while, they thought that all the basalt that was there, those giant stones,
Mm-hmm.
they thought that they were from the volcanic formations.
Okay.
And so they just kind of ignored it. They're like, oh, people just kind of built a little bit with the volcanic stones that were here. And then when they started actually looking at the stones, they're like, oh, these aren't actually from here. And then they started looking more into it as a sacred site. And um, in the least, they're like, it was some type of temple. And then when they started looking at the structures and how it was built up, they're like, oh, this is actually pyramid formation. And then when they started doing the scans of the earth and they saw those chambers, they haven't actually dug down into the chambers as far as I know. Um, but again, there's some historians and some geologists and different what are those what are archaeologists, that's the right word, again words. There's some archaeologists that are like, oh, these are probably just volcanic formations underneath the earth. But then when the other archaeologists start looking at the scans that they have, they're like, no, these seem very structured and like room here, room here, room here. So again, there's more like dissent between archaeologists. Like some are saying, oh, this is legit. Some are saying, no, it's not. Um, it's just very fascinating when you look at all of the different archaeological sites that are around the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's some other ones that have been built up. There's another pyramid that we were watching something about, and it actually was um, a sacred temple that was in the form of a pyramid on a mountain, like within this mountain, and it was taken over by a church. Like they tore down a lot of the building when there was some type of war, some type of conflict, and they built a church on top of the sacred site, and they're
Interesting.
now finding that there's so much more down in the city below that they think was part of the temples and part of this pyramid city.
Hmm.
And it's just so fascinating when you start looking. Most people think of pyramids and they think of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, some people will think about some of the other more well-known pyramids around the world, but there's a lot
I don't think
more.
people always think of the ruins in Mexico as
Mm-mm.
and South America as being pyramids either, but they are.
Yep.
Um, and they're pretty fascinating to look at too. And those, I don't know enough about them to know if there is tombs there, but I know the ones that I visited were like ceremonial
Yeah.
areas. So when you were really feeling like connected to the pyramids and some of that stuff, was it specifically in Egypt that you were feeling connected?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So, what is your thoughts on all of it? Like, how do you think they all got here?
Um, I kind of go back and forth a little bit. I do think that we've had alien intervention, extraterrestrial intervention. And I think that there were probably people who were very connected here that were in communication with beings from other places that assisted in that. But I do think that they're communication devices. I think that they're meant to amplify energy to allow people to connect on different levels. And I think part of my statement earlier where I was like, people had to have been connecting and communicating around the world because there's no way that you could have that many pyramids and that many different formations that were all so similar with the same stories. There's no way. And so I think that they were communication devices to amplify energy to help with the energetic balance around the world and also communication between like the heavens and human beings here. Like, I don't know. I think
That's
there's a lot more to it, but
that's interesting though. I like hearing the different views on what the purpose could be. And you're right, because there's so many and there's so many different places, there's a good chance that there was various reasons for
Mhm.
all of them. But it still begs the question, like, how did they happen?
Mhm.
Some of
Yeah.
them. Um,
Yeah.
the things that I was, or how it was explained to me when I was younger, was always a little confusing to me
Mhm.
because it wasn't really ever a clear answer. It was just basically like, well, they used slaves to build the pyramids, and I'm like, but how did they do it? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
what?
Right? I don't know any person who can carry a half a ton. Like, I just don't.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. But um I do think that the whole subject is pretty interesting, and I'm kind of curious what thoughts and ideas people have about it, because it is such a I don't know. I feel like sometimes it's a very vague thing for people, and other times they have lots of opinions on it. So now I'm really
Yeah.
curious what people think about it. Because the biggest connection I've always thought is when somebody said, like, well, aliens must have helped. I'm like, that probably makes the most sense to me. But you also would have to believe that aliens exist, and then you'd
Mhm.
have to stretch your brain to believe that there was some reason that they needed to do this. So I get why
Mhm.
people are like, I don't need to know this.
Yep.
Like, I do get that. But we should all be curious.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of little seeds of truth out there that would be interesting to put all together.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish that there was like a timeline of the petroglyphs and the hieroglyphs in those different places because I think it would be fascinating to look at it from like the timeline standpoint of the stories that were being told on all of the walls and in those sacred spaces because I've seen several that talk about the giants who came in and were helping and then there's other ones that have like these very mantis looking beings who came in and were helping and I don't know if I've talked about before, but I love the mantis beings. They are very beautiful beings who are very helpful to humans. And so that would make sense to me as well, that you would have mantis beings coming in from another world to assist. Um, but there's very specific stories that are told in a lot of those locations at different times. So it's not even just like this one timeline talks about this. It's like, oh, when we were building the structure or when we were doing this ceremony, this random being that looks exactly like this random being that was in this story in the other place shows up in their imagery.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just like, it would be so cool to lay all of those out and look at all of those stories side by side and see what what comes up in all of those stories.
Mm-hmm.
It's like even so like there's so many stories where they talk about a great flood that happened and most of those stories show up at the same timeline. And then there's stories about like bird people coming in, and those show up in very similar timelines in a lot of different historical sites. So it's just I want to see all the
Sounds
timelines
like a
put
research
together.
project, Jen.
Yeah, it sounds like a research project for somebody else. I get very distracted. I'm like, you show me the details, I will listen. But I get very distracted, and then I'm like, oh, look, shiny thing over there.
Well, maybe some of our listeners have some insights in this too, and we can add an extra little like note in our timeline for how it all played out together.
Yes, that would be helpful, you guys.
But I certainly would like to continue, especially if we get more information on some of this. I would like to continue having conversations about some of this stuff because I feel like so many of these episodes we touch on things and some of it might be super interesting, like wow, I never heard of that before, but it's just like this tiny little bite of like this whole like mountain of spaghetti.
Yep.
That's the only thing I can
Yeah.
think of right now. I don't know, maybe because it could vaguely look like a pyramid.
That would be a really hard mountain to climb, Tammy.
Yes, it would. But I
You'd
said
have to,
bite,
like...
so it needed to be food. Anyway, reeling it back in. It's just a little like snippet, so would be really fun to go back and talk about some of this stuff. And me personally, having been on like a pretty interesting and intense and expansive journey, like some of the things that I might have talked about a year ago, now I'm like, oh, I get it, it totally makes sense. But at that time I had no idea. There might be some listeners that have the same experience. It's just, you get new information, you're like, I want to talk more. So we'll have to go back through some of our old episodes and talk about some of that stuff again too.
Cool.
But anyway, it was fun talking about spaghetti mountains and pyramids.
Yeah. Do you know how to say that one pyramid yet?
Nope. I was trying to think of how I wrote it down. And it was coming out as like
Gangnam Style.
Oh, yes, it came out of my head. No.
I just listened to that song yesterday.
Hey! I did it! Yay!
Yay!
We're going to end on a really good note.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. See you next week.
Bye. If you want more woo, please feel free to check the links in the description. Of course, we love hearing from you, so keep letting us know all of your lovely ideas. Have a beautiful day, our wonderful woo mates.